Hello, brothers and sisters. Today we're going to share a little time together talking about grief and loss. In this session, we're going to talk specifically about an important way to think about healing from grief and loss and some possible skills that you can employ that will help the grief journey be a healthier one that will be more useful to you. My name is Marie Ricks. I am a licensed professional counselor and have been specifically trained to work with clients in traumatized grief and loss. So today I'd like to share with you a little bit about some of the things that you might find useful in your own grief journey so that you can heal in a way that will be useful as you go along that journey. As you and I think about the scriptures, we can learn a lot from the journey that Job took. As you know, he suffered a very traumatic loss, multiple losses in fact, as so often happens in our own lives. His sorrow at the beginning was so great that his friends, who sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights, and did not spake a word with him, but just sat with him in his foxhole, saw that his grief was very great. A little bit later, Job himself is able to describe what his grief is. "Oh, that my grief were thoroughly weighed," he says, "for my calamity is laid in the balances together. For now it would be heavier than the sands of the sea." So if we can be with Job for a minute in his grief and loss, he very much is expressing the same kind of experience that many of us have as fellow grievers. But notice an interesting thing later in the book of Job. God gives a promise unto Job and likewise unto us. Sorrow is turned into joy before him. That is the theme of today's presentation. How do we, as fellow grievers, move from the deep sorrow that we're experiencing into the joy that is promised before him? Today we will kind of divide our time together into 4 different sections. We'll do a little bit of clinical work, some psychoeducation. I'll talk about some skills for recovery, things I'm going to encourage you to reduce doing, things I'm going to encourage you to continue to do or maybe do more of, and then some specific skills to practice. Then we'll move into some scriptural understanding, modern revelation, and I'll give you several resources at the end of the presentation that may be useful to you in your own grief journey. As we talk about grief, it's really helpful if we have some idea and the capacity to use words to describe what's happening to us. Grief expression tends to happen in several ways. Anticipatory grief is the grief that we experience before a person dies when we know that they're going to pass away. So if we have a terminally ill relative or friend, or we have someone that has a chronic illness that is causing their health to diminish very quickly and death is ahead of us, we move into a place where we're anticipating the death and we have some grief symptoms, we have some sadness, even if on the outside many times because we're caretaking, we try to keep a fresh and happy face with the person that we're taking care of. Instrumental grief is a grief that tends to happen after a person's died and is one way that we see grieving happening in action. Instrumental grief is when a person is busy taking care of funeral arrangements or burial arrangements or addressing personal possessions. So we see some busyness that's going on, some action that's going on, and not a lot of emotion. At the other end of the spectrum, we have intuitive grief, where there's a lot of introspection, there's a lot of tears, there's gathering of mementos, there's a lot of sharing of stories between people. There is no right or wrong way to go along your own grief journey, but maybe some of these terms that we're talking about will help you understand both yourself and those around you and the different ways that we move along that grief journey. For a minute, we're going to talk about the specifics of losing a child as a way for us to grow into this experience of suffering a tremendous loss and then trying to find our way along the grief journey so that we can find healing. Some of the challenges that we struggle with when anyone dies, including a child, are called secondary losses. So we have the tremendous loss of the child. Then we have all these other things. And as we go along the grief journey, we have these signposts where the loss is brought to us very strongly again. We call these secondary losses. We will never see them grow up. We will not know about their personality, their interests, their skills, and their capacity as they mature. We will never be with them when there are major life milestones like graduating from high school or college, going on a mission, getting married, having children. And for many people, not having your children in your mature years can be something you worry about because you had kind of hoped that they would also be there for you to support you. When there's a loss of a child in a family, there's also a great change in family dynamics. So if an older child dies and the second oldest becomes the oldest child, he takes on new roles. Or if the second youngest child suffers the loss of his younger sibling, then he now becomes the younger sibling. And sometimes there might be two daughters in a family, and now there's only one daughter. And so there's a lot of shifting in the dynamics of the way families, both immediate and extended, work. And these losses are also part of the complexity of the grief journey. As you and I work together today, you may find that you are not yet on the place of your grief journey where you can really embrace or practice some of the things that we're going to talk about. But I encourage you to listen carefully because the grief journey has signposts where we tend to become ready to look at things or to try things. And if you listen carefully, maybe when those signposts come for you on your grief journey, you'll say, oh, I know now what to do. I know what's next for me. So we're going to talk about some things we want to reduce on our grief journey. We're going to talk about things we want to encourage and some skills that we want to practice that'll make it easier for us. As we start into this, I want to make a side comment. For reasons that are not well understood, when we talk about grief and the grief journey, we tend to use terms that have to do with healing, which implies that a person in grief is ill. We don't have a lot of better words to use, but I want to honor the fact that a person in grief is not ill, is not sick. But often, yes, grief does break us. And so the journey we take does look like healing in some respects because it's a time for us to integrate back into our life the new understanding of the fact that we have a loved one or a friend on the other side of the veil, and we will be without them for the foreseeable future. So what kinds of things might we reduce as we're considering having a more healthy grief journey? It's really important not to tell a parent or a child or a sibling not to feel bad about the loss. This particularly is the case when an older person has passed away. Loss is loss. Whether it's your grandfather, it's your parent, your sibling, your child, a cousin, a relative, or a friend. And we feel bad. And being told not to feel bad doesn't change us feeling bad, but tends to cause us to close in and not express our emotions, even though we're still feeling them. So it's important that if we do receive that kind of advice, that we don't tell others the same thing, because we just need to feel bad for a while. We do not discuss replacing the lost person with someone else. We don't talk about having future children as a replacement or marrying again as a replacement. It is true, you may choose to marry again or you may choose to have other children, but people are not replaced. Each of us is unique and each of us has a place in God's plan. And so replacement is not something that we say to others or that we think about ourselves. It's really important that we do not have what's called the culture of silence. A healthy grief journey includes speaking about the deceased over and over and over again, sometimes with many tears, sometimes with some humor. Having that culture in a home is very, very devastating, especially for young children who have a great need to talk about their feelings. I encourage you to speak about the deceased every single day. It can be a simple comment such as, you know what, I'm remembering now that Grandpa also liked chocolate chip cookies when they first came out of the oven. Or it might be a more tearful thing. Do you remember when He ran across the room when he was a little child, when he was upset, and he would run into the couch and flop his head on the cushions. It doesn't matter what you do, but the person who has passed away is very important to the culture of the family and the dynamics of the family. And so it's important that the speaking about the child needs to happen all the time. If you're a caretaker or a friend of someone who is suffering from grief, initiate a conversation. What today are you remembering about the person that you lost? I encourage you to not make major decisions for about a year after the death. We lose up to 30% of our capacity to think well when we are facing a traumatic death, and there isn't a death that isn't traumatic. And so it's helpful for us to make small decisions and small plans and small dreams, but major decisions, if at all possible, are best delayed for almost a year, sometimes 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 years, so that we're in a settled place and we're acting in a place where we can feel really comfortable with those major decisions. So, on the flip side, there are 4 or 5 things that I encourage you to consider doing. I encourage you to find a space regularly, every day if possible, where you can have habitual reflection. Obviously, the most optimum situation would be for you to be able to go to a park, or to hike up a mountain, or to walk around a lake. All of our circumstances are different, but I encourage you to find your place for reflection. Reflection implies that you're generally alone. You are not diverted or distracted by media or music, but you're with yourself so that you can feel what you're feeling. You can be taught by the Spirit. And it is in these times of feeling the Spirit and feeling our own feelings that we have the best health. One of the sayings that we use in counseling is you have to feel in order to heal. And there is no way around it. We have to walk through the middle of the muck in order to come out on the other side. As has been spoken about in the scriptures many times, Jesus set this example by moving away from the hustle and bustle of the crowd and finding his own space for reflection. In Matthew 5, 1-2 it says, Jesus went up into a mountain, and then when he was set, his disciples came to him. So he had some time alone to be with himself, to be in his wilderness, to be and reflect on the things that were going on in his life. I encourage you in this finding time for space and reflection to engage in a project that would honor the person that has passed away. Here are some examples from my own clinical practice. A sibling griever decided to create a small book that he called Songs That Never Cease. He took his photographs and added poetry and prose with regards to his sibling, and then he had it printed and he shared it with family members. I encourage you to create an environment of empathy. Now let me explain the difference between sympathy and empathy. Sympathy is when we're asking people to feel sorry for us, and we're in a place where we're not interested in growth, we're not interested in embracing, we're very much closed in. Empathy is when we're asking people to be with us and help us to understand ourselves. Dr. Bruce Perry suggests that relationships are the agents of change, and the most powerful therapy is love. Find those friends that can be with you and family members that can be with you, that can be empathetic, that will sit with you in your foxhole of grief and listen and love without any attempt to fix you or change you. Because grief is a process that we go through. It's not something simple like cleaning a bathroom and then you're done, or finishing a house and then you move in. It's more or less something that's happening to you that you're highly engaged in. And part of this is having relationships where love can be expressed and understanding can be proffered. I encourage you to engage as soon as you are able in activities that honor the deceased. In my clinical practice, several clients have been willing to share photographs of their own experiences. And as you're able, I encourage you to consider, what can I do because I cannot love and hug, pamper, take care of the person that's now deceased, so that all that love that's residing in me has a place to go. The love doesn't stop because the person has passed away. And it's important on that healing journey, if we have a healthy one, that we have a place for it to go. Let me give you some ideas. A mother that very sadly lost her son to a drug overdose gathered up his t-shirts and made teddy bears out of those t-shirts so she could give them to his children so they would have something to hug. She was healing in her process of grief. The children also had a healing experience because they also had something to hug that had belonged to their father. A widow griever, when she came to a place where she felt the strength of being able to consider moving along her grief journey in a healthy way, and was a quilter, chose to make a new quilt for her master bedroom. She chose a design that was meaningful to her. She pieced it together, and she used the quilt to signal a new beginning in her life. Not a return to her old normal, but an engagement in her new normal. A woman who lost her daughter, who was just early into school in about 18 hours to a brain fever, found that the best way that she could engage was to spread pennies along a fountain near her home on the eve of her daughter's birthday, and then the next day to go to the classroom of her daughter and engage with the children who had known her daughter by sharing treats with them and by having birthday cakes. In this case, the ashes of her daughter were put in a bunny that was stuffed, and that bunny was something that was part of what she kept close to her so that she could always have something to touch and hold because her only daughter was no longer available. A widow who had a challenging marriage and discovered things about her husband that were very, very difficult for her to know about when he was no longer there to account for himself, found her honoring activity in creating paintings that were abstract and tended for her to show the amount of turmoil that she was engaged in as she was trying to resolve the relationship as she knew it, and then the relationship, as she found out later, had probably also been happening during their marriage. That family wanted to honor a father that had been killed or had passed away from colon cancer. And so the daughter, the son-in-law, the friend, and grandchildren took rocks and painted them, dug a hole, put the rocks in the hole, and then planted a tree on the anniversary of the death. What happens is as we engage in these honoring activities, we're able to release a lot of the energy, a lot of the love, and we're able to talk about the person and remember them. And everyone that's involved, and you can see in this case several family members were involved, they were able to heal because they were able to feel. I encourage you for a considerable period of time after the death of the person that you love to keep your life as normal as possible. Engage in the same activities, eat the same kinds of foods, wear the clothes that you have in your closet. Don't stress about a lot of external things so that you can have the energy, mental and emotional, to be able to just deal with the grief. So keeping your life routines very, very normal as much as you can. Ironically, sometimes a traumatic death is surrounded by a move or a promotion at work or the loss of employment, and that can be an extra thing that you're trying to deal with. But what you can keep the same, try to keep the same, especially with children and teenagers. This stability helps root them again in the midst of the chaos that is happening because of the death. I encourage you to plan and execute something constructive every single day, no matter how small. Whether it's deciding to sweep the front porch or to cut down the dead dandelions, but try to move forward into your new life just a little bit each day, even though you are not in the mood to do that, because sometimes we have to practice first in order for our mood to follow afterwards. I encourage you to write a letter or several letters or even many letters to the deceased. One of the challenges of grief is that we have lots of conflicting emotions associated usually with the death. Let me give you an example. There are many times when we wish we could have done more of with the person that has died. There are other times when we remember there are things we wish that we had done better. And thirdly, there are things that we wished we had done so much differently. Let me give you an example. Let's say that your mother has passed away and you were writing a letter to her and you were feeling quite a bit of conflict. So a letter might sound something like this. Dear Mom, I miss you so much. I can't believe you're gone, and yet it doesn't feel like you were ever here because the pain is so consuming for me. I wish that we had had more time to take walks, and I would have put your arm through mine, and we could have gotten to know each other a little bit better. I wish I'd been a better daughter, and that one time when I yelled at you, I wished I'd come and apologized. If I could do anything differently, Mom, I think that I would have helped you more around the kitchen, maybe helped you clean up after those delicious meals that you made. What happens when we write a letter of this sort is we identify for ourselves some of the specific things about our grief that might still be troubling us, and we're able to move through that, and maybe with someone else who is still alive, we can do more of, better of, or then different of, because we've been able to identify for ourselves how we want to live in our new normal in a better way. After you've written this letter, it's usually very helpful to read it to a mentor who can sit with you in your grief, hold your tears and your sorrow, and be with you while you try to explain to them and yourself the feelings that are going on inside your head and your heart. Writing this letter to the deceased can be very, very useful, and I encourage you to do it. So let's talk about some practices that'll really, really help. You might not be in place in the grief journey yet where you can think about some of these things, but I encourage you just to hold these ideas until it's time on your grief journey to maybe engage in them. It's very, very helpful if someone volunteers to help you to allow them to do it. If someone comes up and says, "What can I do for you?" think of something for them to do. They invite you to lunch, for instance. Say yes. If they want to hear your story again, tell it again. This is very much a part of the healthy grief journey. Now, what tends to happen as you move away time-wise from the grief, it feels like other people re-engage in their life and things go forward for other people, but you're still caught in your grief. Sometimes we feel like we're a burden to other people, and so it becomes hard to reach out. It becomes hard to ask for help. It becomes hard for us to do anything but just close in on ourselves. I encourage you to understand that others do not feel that you're a burden because you're still in grief. And as you can, reach out when you have that need, when those emotions fill up inside of you and you've just got to tell someone what's going on in your mind. Grow this village of support. We encourage people to usually have at least 7 friends, 3 really close ones that they can call on. If the first one's not available, they can go to the second one. If the second one's not available, they can go to the third one. And then 4 friends that might actually be more casual friends, but at least there's someone that they can talk to. Being isolated while you're grieving is a very difficult way to heal. I encourage you to structure your time usage and get in some good habits, going to bed at the same time every night, getting up in the morning and having breakfast, taking care of yourself in that way, having lunch, taking care of yourself in that way, having dinner. Structure your time usage so, for instance, your morning is taking care of bills and housework or going to work, and that your evenings are such that you might take once a week and go to the temple. But structure it so that you are moving even if you're not in the mood. This re-engagement in some of the routines that have been part of your sacred habits particularly will be very, very helpful in the healing journey. I encourage you to give yourself what we call 5-minute challenges. We really struggle sometimes when we're grieving to even get out of bed in the morning. I encourage you to have a daily 5-minute challenge. Okay, I'm going to get the vacuum out. I'm going to set the timer for 5 minutes, and I'm going to see if I can get down that hallway. The Cheerios are driving me nuts under my feet. That's a 5-minute challenge. Or, okay, I'm going to get up and I'm going to shower. I don't feel like it. I'm just going to get back in my pajamas, but I haven't bathed for 3 or 4 days. I'm going to do a 5-minute shower. These 5-minute challenges, again, help us to practice living again when our mood is not in a place where we're really ready to. And the very practicing moves us forward on the grief journey in a way that helps us to be proactive in our engagement in the grief journey. Finally, I encourage you to engage in an activity that might be very closely aligned to your tragedy. Doing this is very, very helpful to be able to release all that love you and I have talked about in a way that redirects your life and makes it useful. For instance, a grieving mother whose son passed away from a drug overdose that was exasperated because he was starving and lived in a large city, found 10 donated refrigerators that she was able to place on the street. And then she coordinated with local groceries so that the refrigerators would also always be filled with foods such as vegetables and fruits and yogurts and meats that she maintained through the donations so that anyone on the street could go to these refrigerators and find food. So she took her tragedy and she made it so that she could have something to do with all the love that she had for the child that she had lost in a way that also would prevent a future death. Another family who worked with a family member that had lost a child to stillbirth annually gets together and makes t-shirts. On the first year, they put on the front of each t-shirt in honor of Gigi, and then on the back, when ye are in the service of your fellow beings, ye are in the service of your God. And then the family members, on the anniversary of when this little girl was born at rest, and for 2 days afterwards, they engaged in things of service and then sent the photographs to the parents of the little girl that passed away. So one sister went to a hospital with flowers, grandparents chose to do temple work, others helped clean. Some of the cousins went and worked at Feed My Starving Children. Some picked up trash around the neighborhood. Some babysat, and some did chores for their mom. It was big and it was small, but the parents said it all mattered, and it reminded them of Gigi and brought them closer to Christ. So specifically, as we're talking about all these things, there are some tasks that are signposts on the road to recovery. When I work with people, I try to help them understand that they have to take an active role in the healing journey. They have to lean into that grief, because then the healing can be complete. First of all, our first task on this journey is we have to come to a place where we can hold the fact that the person has died and find peace in accepting that the death has happened. We don't relinquish to our grief. We don't relinquish our grief. We're not getting rid of it. It's a backpack that we hold. But we learn to tolerate, to embrace, and to be with our grief. We respect those waves of grief that flow over us because each one of them teaches us something. The second task of grief recovery is to experience some relief from grief. Initially, this is hardly possible because we are so engrossed with our grief and so encompassed with the experience. But our goal is to embrace those waves of grief that they come, feel the discomfort and the pain, and honor it in our body, in our head, and in our heart. Try to learn the lesson that this particular grief is teaching us, and then invite the grief to move away and go off for a little while because we have to get dinner or go to bishopric meeting or maybe just get off to work. So this experiencing a relief from grief is a very proactive thing: awareness, acknowledgement, processing, and then letting it move on and move away. The third task of grief recovery is to accept that you will never be the person you were before, and helping others understand that you are not going to be able to go back to that person you were before, innocent, light-hearted, more laughing and etc. for a long period of time. Instead, you are going to be moving to a new normal, more enriched, more broadened, more experienced in life tragedies, and hopefully more lovable. We have to understand that we want to move from unhealthy to healthy grieving. Sometimes we talk about the grieving as either being an unhealthy path towards loneliness or a healthy path towards solitude. Solitude expresses the glory of being alone and without the person that we loved so much, whereas loneliness expresses the pain of feeling alone. And that process on this spectrum between solitude and loneliness is something we have to strive for, because our default tends to move us towards loneliness, but solitude is what we can strive for. How can I be healthy in this glory of being alone? So, a client that I worked with really struggled with this default of going towards loneliness. And so we worked on some things, particularly around important anniversaries, so that we would have a more healthy solitude attitude. And she chose to do something I thought was rather creative. She went to Costco and asked a fellow shopper to pick a bunch of flowers out and put them in a box for her. Then she went to the cash register and asked the cash register to take the money out of her credit card, but not tell her how much it cost. And then she went home on her anniversary and opened flowers from her husband. This was something that they had had since they had been in courtship. And while it wasn't the same as if he had chosen, there was still the element of surprise, still the honoring of a routine and something that they had done every year between themselves. And it relieved a little bit of the deep grief that she was experiencing around that anniversary. The fourth task of grief recovery is to reinvest in a new focus. It's very interesting to me that in Alma, we learned something, and Brother Pingree helps us understand. Our trials, in our case, grief, helps us discover and prepare for the work our Heavenly Father has for us to do. Alma explains, after much tribulation, the Lord made me an instrument in His hands. Brothers and sisters, one of the hardest things about losing someone we love is that our stewardship over that person, whether it was a parent or a sibling or a child, suddenly and abruptly is done. And so one of the questions we can ask, as is indicated here in Alma, is Heavenly Father, how do I now be an instrument in your hand with this energy and this love that I have for the person that is no longer in my life? And then trust in the promise, as happened to Alma, that God did make him an instrument in His hands. Erica Roman is a widow that helps us understand a concept about expansion. As we are reinvesting in new focuses, she suggests, I say expanded because that's what widowed hearts do. They expand. One love isn't moved out to make room for something new. An addition is built. Just as my love for my daughter is not diminished by the birth of my son, so too the love of widows can have for someone new does not diminish the love for someone that is lost. The expansion of the heart is part of the grieving process. In this case for her, it was as a widow. It might be that the expansion happens after you've lost a father or a mother, or an expansion if you've lost a child. The expansion is part of the healing journey. Watch for it, feel it, and as it comes, embrace it and hold it tenderly and sacredly. This expansion is part, kind of one of the signposts, we might say, of the healing journey. Elder Runland said in conference, "Mortals say of some temporal suffering, no future bliss can make up for the pain that I'm experiencing right now. Not knowing that heaven once attained will work backwards and turn even that agony into glory. And the blessed will be able to say, we have never lived anywhere but in heaven." Brothers and sisters, this concept is a little bit over the top of our heads sometimes, but I trust in the promise. We someday will be able to say that we have never lived anywhere but in heaven, and that the agony and the suffering we have will turn into glory. He goes on to say, God will strengthen, help, and uphold us, and He will sanctify us in our deepest distress. When we gather our family histories and do temple work in behalf of our ancestors, as one of these activities that you and I have talked about during our time together, God fulfills many of these promised blessings simultaneously on both sides of the veil. So one of the activities that we can be involved in that will bless the deceased is to gather our family histories and go to the temple in behalf of our ancestors, because blessings happen on both sides of the veil when we are engaged in this way. Let's look at some scriptures so that we can maybe hold them until we're able to embrace them. In Hebrews, it says that Jesus, for the joy that was set before Him, endured the cross, despising the shame, and is set down on the right hand of the throne of God. Brothers and sisters, if we extrapolate this scripture to adjust it and to liken it unto ourselves, I would like to propose that there is joy set before us. And if we can hold on to the fact that that joy is going to come back into our lives, that we are going to find that joy, that that joy is going to be there, we can hold on during this desperate, difficult time of darkness and mourning. In Doctrine and Covenants it says, we shall live together in love, insomuch that we will weep for the loss of them that dies. So we're not, as we're setting and holding this joy before us, having any lack of weeping. The weeping is predominant right now, but the joy is promised. In Alma it says, He breaketh, meaning Christ, the bands of death, that the grave shall have no victory, and the sting of death shall be swallowed up in the hopes of glory. Alma says in 22:14, and He breaketh the bands of death, that the grave shall have no victory, and the sting of death shall be swallowed up in the hopes of glory. Brothers and sisters, this is another promise that we can hold on to when we're so desperately encompassed with our grief. That death shall be swallowed up in the hopes of glory. Doctrine and Covenants says, peace be unto thy soul. Thy adversary and thy affliction shall be but a small moment. And then, if thou endure it well, God shall exalt thee on high, and thou shalt triumph over all thy foes. Brothers and sisters, the destiny of those of us who are fellow grievers is that there will be triumph. And that triumph will be because we only have to die once. And then we have eternity to be together with those that we love. Remember, says Doctrine and Covenants 3:5, remember also the promises which were made to you. Brothers and sisters, I encourage you to continue to live a covenant life, to strive to live worthy of the promises that have been made to you, or that can be made to you as you move on your grief journey. Those promises are sure, and I testify of them. We will not be left wanting at the end. Let's look at some things that have been said in modern day revelation. Elder Worthland suggests that because of life's experiences, we will all have our Fridays We will experience those broken times when it seems we can never be put together again. But I testify unto you, he says, in the name of the one who conquered death, Sunday will come. In the darkness of our sorrow, Sunday will come. No matter our desperation, no matter our grief, Sunday will come. In this life or the next, Sunday will come. Boyd K. Packard offers a special promise to widows, and I would extrapolate that to widowers too. I know that there is a spirit that can give you power to be both father and mother if necessary. You see, because of death, we become a living memorial of the person that has passed away. And in certain covenant relationships, the person who stays, according to what Brother Packer is saying, receives a spirit that gives power to act in the roles of both the person that stays and the person that passes away. Elder Nelson says, returning from earth to life in our heavenly home requires a passage through, not around, the doors of death. As seedlings of God, we barely blossom on earth. We fully flower in heaven. This is a very helpful quote for me because I like to think of those that have passed away around me as blossoming, fully flowering in their heavenly roles. He goes on to say, our limited perspective would be enlarged if we could witness the reunion on the other side of the veil, when doors of death open to those returning home. Such was the vision of the psalmist who wrote, precious in the sight of the Lord is the death of his saints. This death allows us to progress to the next world. President Howard helps us understand if our lives and our faith are centered on Jesus Christ and his restored gospel, nothing can ever go permanently wrong. Sometimes in death, it feels like things have gone so very wrong, and it feels pretty permanent. But this is a promise from a prophet. Nothing can go permanently wrong. However, if our lives are not centered on the Savior and his teachings, no other success can ever go permanently right. Bishop Waddle suggests that the atonement of Jesus Christ provides the ultimate corrective and healing measures to every wounded body, damaged spirit, and broken heart. Brothers and sisters, I encourage you to enfold yourself in the principles of the atonement of Jesus Christ and to believe in his capacity to hold you and to heal you, and that the process you are going through of refinement as you grieve is part of this corrective and healing measure that Bishop Waddell talks about. Elder Packard confirms this as a second witness. His mercy is the mighty healer, even to the wounded incident. As we wrap up today, I would like for you to hold with me this beautiful quote. You can cut all the flowers, but you cannot keep spring from coming. Brothers and sisters, those we have loved and lost are gone, but we cannot keep spring from coming. The resurrection is sure. Our capacity to be reunited is promised. And I encourage you to hold on to these things and to engage in a very proactive way in your own grief journey. And as you pass these various signposts, to honor our Heavenly Father and his Son, Jesus Christ, for their love and support as you heal and move forward with your life. There are several books that I'd like to suggest you consider. One is called A Time to Grieve. Another one is called Finding Meaning, the Sixth Stage of Grief. Another book that's useful is called Second First, a step-by-step guide to life after loss. There are also several good YouTube videos about grief. I encourage you, when you feel capacitated, to watch them and see if they are useful to you and if they speak to you. I thank you very much for the opportunity today to share some time with you. and to speak of the most sacred journey that we take after we have lost someone that we love. In the name of Jesus Christ, amen.